When most people think of evolution, they think of the evolution of whole new species or taxonomic groups over long periods of time. This is actually referred to as macroevolution, as shown in this evolutionary tree here, where you have a common ancestor from which new groups of species or taxonomic groups have evolved, such as mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. However, evolution can actually occur at a smaller scale, and that is within the population of a species, and this is referred to as microevolution. And microevolution is the relatively short-term genetic change within a population. And this occurs over short periods of time as a result of changes in allele frequency. These changes in allele frequency that cause microevolution can eventually lead to macroevolution. Because we know that microevolution can lead to macroevolution, if you can figure out what factors affect the allele frequency in a population, then you know the processes of evolution. And there are 5 of these, which are small population size, non-random mating, mutations, gene flow, and of course the 5th is natural selection. And these are all described in a fantastic video by Paul Anderson, where he refers to these processes as the 5 fingers of evolution. The unique thing about natural selection is that it is the only process of evolution that leads to adaptive evolution. That is, it is the only mechanism that can lead to a new species that is better suited to its environment. An adaptation is a feature that provides a selective advantage because it improves an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. And that's very important because without reproduction, you're not actually passing on any sort of genetic advantage to the next generation. So an adaptation includes structures, behaviors, or physiological processes that are heritable and contribute to reproductive success. So a couple of examples. One is the bilby, which lives in inland desert environments in Australia. In order to adapt to its environment, the bilby has evolved to have physical traits such as strong forelimbs for digging. It's got large ears and sharp sense of smell to track down food, and it also can obtain enough moisture from their food. They don't actually have to seek out water to drink. Behaviorally, the bilby has evolved to dig deep burrows and avoid heat and predators, and they also hunt at night. So this is a classic example of an adaptation that has evolved in order to enable the bilby to survive and reproduce in its environment. Snowgums are another example, and this is a eucalypt species that is in the alpine and subalpine areas of Australia. So they live in an environment with low temperatures, lots of frost, snow, lots of rain and strong winds, and they're adapted to that environment physically by rapidly growing in the summer but remaining dormant in the winter. Behaviorally, they are small in size and they grow close to the ground and have flexible branches, which enables them to deal with the strong winds in the environment that they live in. Evolution due to natural selection occurs in response to something referred to as selection pressures. And selection pressures are factors that influence the survival of an individual, population, or species. And there are different types of selection pressures. For example, competition for food and territories, predator-prey relationships, sexual selections where traits are selected that attract a particular mate, disease, and climate. The most iconic example of evolution due to natural selection is that of the peppered moth in the United Kingdom. And the peppered moth came in two different colours or phenotypes. And that was this lighter grey mottled colour and a darker melanic or carbonic colour, which was due to a mutation in the DNA of the species. What's interesting is that the frequency of the colour of these two moths changed over about a 100-year period. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, or prior to the 1850s, the majority of the moths in the populations were a light grey colour. So there's very few of the melanic colour. Whereas after the Industrial Revolution, the majority of moths in industrialized areas were this darker melanic colour. So what was going on here? Well, a scientist by the name of H.D. Kettlewell was interested by this issue and Well, a scientist by the name of H.D. Kettlewell was curious about this situation, and he hypothesized that the change in the frequencies of the coloured moths from before and after the Industrial Revolution was all down to the ability of these different colour moths to camouflage themselves against predation from birds. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, he hypothesized that the majority of moths were the grey colour because they were able to camouflage themselves in with the lichen on the trunks of the trees that they lived on quite well. This meant that they were less visible to the birds that would predate on them, giving them a selective advantage over the melanic or darker coloured moth that would stand out against the white lichen background and would be easier for the birds to see and predate on. The Industrial Revolution, starting in the 1850s, produced a lot of soot and pollution, mainly from the burning of coal. And some of this soot and pollution settled onto the tree trunks on which the peppered moths lived. This then changed the background colour on which they existed. So all of a sudden you had the melanic, darker coloured moth on a dark background, and it was much better camouflaged than the grey moth on a dark background which stood out, therefore was more readily predated by birds. With more darker moths surviving, they're able to pass their genes on to the next generation, therefore increasing the frequency of darker colour moths in the population compared to the grey colour moths. The selective pressure in this example is predation. This is an example of predation causing evolution due to natural selection. And this is because predation is the pressure that is influencing survival of the individuals in that population.